you, delivers to you. This is buffering. There is another technique, streaming. Generally, in the streaming technique, what happens from the server? So actually from that means this chunk will come. Now what happens? So another chunk also in the behind second chunk, second part also is coming. So second part is also until all the it will put part in client location. Now this comes in the second place, and behind that another part is coming. So that means another part is coming, and this is pushed into this client location, and behind that another part is coming. It moves forward and another part is coming. This is called streaming. We call this mechanism as streaming. So that is called streaming. So in that streaming, what happens is you will not see the entire at a time, part by part you are watching. The image you can see part by part displayed. That is what actually streaming technique. Streaming technique is continuous. Buffer is first store everything into buffer, from there it could send. That is the approach actually. So actually buffer here in Node.js is not related to buffering data. It is because Node.js will not buffer the data. Already I told you. Traditionally, that is how actually it happens. So that means buffers were introduced to help developers. Buffers were used to help developers in order to deal with binary type of data. But buffers were introduced to help developers to deal with binary type of data. Binary data. That is the main intention actually. So actually buffers in Node.js are not related to buffering. They are not related to buffering. So generally that happens in receiving the data. What it does is, so it is related to access data and store data into buffer. It is not related to buffering technique. It is just accessing and storing data into buffer. Generally, how we can create the buffer means how you can configure the buffer. So generally, because in Node.js buffer is configured by using buffer class. So buffer is created by using the methods buffer.from, and it is created by using buffer.allocate, and it is defined by using buffer.allocate unsafe. These are all the methods used for configuring the buffer. And you can handle various types of values into it. You can handle various types of values into it. That means array, size, different types of values you can store into that. So let's see how we can allocate the buffer, how you can initialize. So actually, you can create the buffer by passing the size, how much space you want to allocate. So technically, it is used to allocate the memory so that you can store some value and you can access the content. If you want to allocate the memory, so you have to define some constant. So syntactically, we need to define in this way. Let's see. So I will give a simple program here. Buffer demo.js. And here we are declaring, say, constant buffer is equal to buffer dot. So we have the methods. So allocate. How much space you want to allocate? You have to define the size. It is defined by using bytes. 1024 bytes is equal to 1 kilobyte. So I want to allocate the buffer 1 KB, 2 KB, or 1 MB size I want to allocate. Then actually we have to use, open the calculator, 1024 bytes equal to 1 byte, 1 KB. 1024 into 1024. This is 1 MB. So this is the size of 1 MB. So if you want to allocate 1 MB, then you have to use this number. That means it is allocating 1 MB space. 1 MB in the buffer. We can configure that. So the size defined and the size configured. We can allocate. Generally, what is difference between allocate and allocate unsafe? Two options are there. Actually, buffer dot allocate. So it must be initialized. So buffer dot allocate safe, allocate unsafe. So no need to initialize. No need to initialize. So that means you can declare and later use it. But allocate needs initialization. You must initialize some value. That's the reason I given as constant. That means the memory is allocated. And you can store some value into that memory. That means we can access the buffer into that. So by using from, so we can have so many options. This buffer object allows you to access the data from the allocated memory. If you want to store some value into the buffer and access it, so how to access? So buffer is like an array. You can access the values from the memory like this. You can store any value and you can access the value. This is allocating the memory. So if you want to store any value into the buffer, so this is just a syntax example. That's how we allocate the memory. And if you want to store some value into it, just you can simply use, so buffer, you can simply configure buffer dot from. And so this defines, so what you want to store in the memory. For example, I am storing some value. So A, B, C, D, some value. In the memory, it is stored in a binary form. That means you are storing A, B, C, D. In the buffer, it is not stored A, B, C, D. Its ASCII codes will be stored actually. So you try that now. Suppose I am using console.log and a buffer of 0. What do you think? What it will return? That means this is A value. It is referring to A. What it will return? In the buffer, A will not be stored. Its ASCII code will be stored. Then what it is going to return? Can you tell? What it is going to return, can you tell? So generally, we know the data it is going to return. It's ASCII codes. So node buffer demo.js, it is going to return 65. Am I right? 65 to 90, right? That is, if you want to read all the data, then generally, so you can put console.log. So from the buffer, so we can just use .toString. It converts the data. That means it is going to return that ABCD. You can read every individual reference and you can return it. Suppose if you want to know how many characters are present, console.long. So we have buffer.length. It will return the total length, number of characters present inside it, 4. It will return the total length present inside it. So we can read every item individually. You can use iterators. So that means you can iterate over the contents in the buffer and you can read all of them. So that means you can directly store values into buffer and you can handle that. So these are the options for configuring. So this is an example for storing values into buffer and reading. This is an example of storing values and reading. Suppose if you want to allocate the memory and you don't want to store more than that allocated memory, then usually what you can do is you can simply use the technique here like this. So buffer dot, so allocate how much. So that means you can define the size just like array, or you can mention bytes also. Suppose I said 4, then I am allocating 4 size only. That means 4 characters only I can store. And if you want to store into it, then you have to use buffer.write. By using the write method, you can store that into it. And here I defined A, B, so C, D, some E, F, G, H like this. I'm storing some value into it. And we are trying to print console.log buffer.toString. ToString, we are accessing that values. So what are the values present inside it? Now I am trying to run this. So it shows A, B, C, D. Because the rest of characters are not stored in the buffer because there is no memory allocated for them. So you have only the memory allocated for 4, then it's only 4. So it will not allow you to store more values. It can store values only for that 4. And it can define. That is basically how it is going to handle. So generally you can handle everything like a array. You can manage everything like an array. So you can handle everything like an array. So if you want to copy the data from the buffer. So if you want to store values into buffer, just like array, extract the values, you can use slice methods. You can use substring like characters. So you can use all those options for handling. But allocating memory, storing value into it, reading the value from it, these are important points. One more option is copying data into buffer is also important. That means, for example, this is example for allocating memory and storing values. So allocating memory and storing values, this is the approach actually. That's how we define. And usually, if we want to copy the buffer, then actually we can do that by using a set method. So by using set method, you can copy the buffer and store in some other location. So for example, suppose we have a constant. So buffer is equal to buffer dot from, and I am storing some value. And I want to create a buffer copy, and allocate the memory for storing that copy. That means we have to allocate 4 size. In that buffer copy, so we can buffer copy, we can set this buffer. So that means whatever original data is there, it creates a duplicate copy. That means console.log. So we have buff.toString and console.log. So buff copy.toString. That means it is going to access the copied data and return it. It is going to access that data and return it. So it is creating a copy of that buffer and accessing and using it. That is generally how it handles. So this is basically how it is going to manage the data, how it is going to manage and configure the data. That is what we call buffers. So it is not related to buffering, it is related to allocating memory. So this is copying buffer. So this is allocating memory, storing value into the memory, and accessing the value from the memory. That is the main concept actually. That is the main concept. So this is generally how it happens. Now there is another technique, that is streams. Generally stream is used for reading and writing data from the files, from a network, data from files. And streaming, as I showed you, it is like a continuous process. So buffering is first copying everything into memory, from there it is delivering you. Streaming is accessing parts of content because content is very large, accessing parts of content and storing in the memory reference and using. And while it is sending you the data, the rest of data is coming into memory. So actually this is Node.js. Node.js can handle streams. Actually, not only Node.js, several technologies can handle the streams. All the technologies server side, they have to handle streams, file streams. So they are very important. So I think if you know C++ like libraries, you have a IO library, input output stream, right? IO library, which is used for reading and writing the data into files. Yes, IO streams. So streams are very regular for reading and writing the data, right? Reading and writing data into files. So streams are used. Streams are used to handle reading and writing files in a network. Are used for reading and writing files in a network. Actually, so every server side technology requires streams to read and write data into file. So actually, Node.js provides a stream module. So by using the stream module, they can read the data and they can manage the data, handling the data from files actually. So usually Node.js provides file stream. FS is actually file stream module. It provides file stream module that that comprises of all properties and methods. Properties and methods to handle read and write operations on file. Read and write operations on file. That is the concept actually. Now, how we can handle it, how we can access and how we can use it. Generally, we can create in a normal way, and we can also handle by using console methods. In a browser, you can return that, and you can access from the console methods, and you can define from the console methods. So streams are different types. Streams are different types. So we have readable streams. So we have writable streams. We have duplex stream, and we have duplex stream, and we have transform stream. Actually, readable streams are used for reading the data from file. Writable stream is for writing the data into file. So duplex streams can use both. It can read and write, combination of both. Transform is nothing but it is used to convert the data into another format. So convert into toString, so convert into JSON, all this can be done by using that. So usually that is a readable, writable, duplex streams. So that's how we can configure. Actually, reading data from a file or presenting the data from the file, as Node.js can do in an asynchronous way. It can do in an asynchronous way. We can handle in asynchronous way. Without asynchronous and with asynchronous, both options are available actually. So for that, actually, we need a file stream library. So example, so we have to install FS module into project. So to read the content from file, for example, see, so in this server, I have in that server folder. In this server folder, I will create a simple file, some help.txt. It's a text document. So Node.js help document, just a simple message, Node.js help document. Actually, it is official Node help documentation. Like this, we are providing something, and some information is present. So it provides Node API for reference. Like this, I written some statement. This is a text document. I want to read the data and I want to return the data from this. Then what we have to do here, so we need to write a program for reading and writing the data or reading the data from the file. It can do in an asynchronous way. How we can read data and how we can present. So it has two techniques, blocking and unblocking technique. Actually, for that, we need to import a library, install the library. npm install fs. Fs is a file stream library. So we have to download that library. And after that, so you have to import fs, where fs is equal to require fs, the file stream library. Now I need to read the file. So fs provides option like a read file. Fs provides a read file. And this read file is expecting the path. So that means what is the file that you want to read. you need to configure the path. So that is nothing but help.txt. It is present in same location. And it uses a callback function. And what this callback function will do is whatever the data comes, it can store the data. Whatever data comes, it can store the data and it can present the data. Console.log. So here it can present the data. That means I am presenting data. So it is in a binary form, 2 string. So we are converting the data into 2 string. That is read file. By using read file, we are reading the content from a file and returning it. And we have another message, console.log. So read complete. So we have read complete. And before that, we have console.log. So read started. Okay, read started. After that reading, after that read completed. These are the 3 functions we have defined. These are the 3 actions we have configured. Now, through that, we can read the information from the file and return it. So here I am compiling and running this here. So you see read started, read completed. And it is showing some data is not there. So that means, so the data dot text is not there. Actually, it is help.txt. And these 2 statements executed. But the point is, it cannot read property to string of null. That means no data is returned actually. Why? Because generally, when you are reading the information from file, so the data comes with 2 options actually. We have an error and a data. So error will return if there is any problem, and this will return the data. So we need to check the condition actually. If not error, if there is no error, then send the data. That is the condition we have to configure. And you see, we are defining that and it gets that information. But see, read started, read complete. After that, reading returned. This is what you saw in the last example also. So because based on which operation is large, based on which operation is large, it is going to perform that operation at the end, or whichever the lightweight task is there, it will return first. That is general thing. So whichever the task is lightweight, it will return first. Rest of the tasks are performed later. So by default, this is an asynchronous technique. So this is an asynchronous technique. Node.js by default uses an asynchronous technique. So install file module and write a program for reading data from file. Using async technique. So by default, we call this technique as unblocking technique. By using the unblocking technique, we can read the data from the file and we can use it. So this is the program. So by using unblocking technique, we can access that. Suppose this is demo.js. That is, by using the unblocking technique, we can handle it. Now, by using blocking technique, actually, we have the methods for blocking technique also. The methods for blocking technique is nothing but usually the blocking technique will allow to perform the next task only when the first task is finished. Actually, here we need to use a different method. That is fs.read file sync. Read file synchronously. Previously, we were reading the file asynchronously. Read file sync. Now, what is the file? we have to define the file. So that is help.txt. That is the file. And here we are using a callback function. And in this callback function, we can present an error. That means this callback function is expecting data. So usually the callback function is defining an error. So, and the data returned. But read file sync is a synchronous way. That means I just defined to read that file synchronously. And whatever result comes, so it will be stored in a data reference. Now we need to present that. So console.log. So data.toString. We are converting the data into string. This is a synchronous. It's not required. But so it is generally used for handling the tasks one after another. So if you don't want to read all at a time, so that means make the request. We want one after another only. Then we can use this technique. So this is read file sync. So that is synchronous. And we also call this as blocking technique. Generally, blocking technique allows us to perform one task after another, and it will not go to the next task until the first task is finished. That's very important. Now we will run this and see. So you see this is synchronous, and I will execute the same. And you see read started. After that reading done. After that read complete. Even that read complete is the lightweight task. It is not performed immediately. So it waits until the second task is finished, because as per the order, second is reading the data. And once that reading of data is finished, now it goes to the next one. It will go to the next part. That is generally how it is going to manage. So this is basically one important point you need to understand. So generally, if you want to read data and to manage data, this is the approach you have to follow. There are two techniques. By default, it uses asynchronous technique. We can use asynchronous technique also, synchronous, right? This is another way. So this example also, this is example of async technique. And this is the same example for sync technique, synchronous technique. And the same concept, but the method is different. We have a synchronous method. We can use that synchronous method and define it. We can access the data and return the data. Similarly, writing data also into the file is important. How you can write data into the file. So this also provides two techniques: synchronously writing the data into file, asynchronously writing the data into file. So, but we prefer asynchronous every time. That means how you write data into file, writing the data into file. This is reading the data. How you write the data into the file. So for example, just here, we are importing that require. After that, we are configuring some content. And in the content, we put some more details. That means here we are adding the content. So I will add that API contains Node API. Yeah, Node API contains topics like buffers, streams, like this I define. Some content roughly, some message. I want to add this into a file. Then we have fs.write file. We have write file sync Into which file? Help.txt. Okay, what is the content? So you have to define the content, whatever the content. And this will give a callback function. And it will use an error if there is a problem. So if we are writing if not error, if there is no error, console.log. So here we define message write successful. Else whatever the message error is there, so console.log, that error message should display. That's the basic approach, how we can write data into a file, how you can configure the data into file. So that is the approach of configuring the data. So here, so many points are there. Writing the data into file, append the data into the file. Generally, append data into the file, what happens is it will add your content towards the end. Write file is adding it, you see now. So I run this buffer demo write successful. And I go here into this text document. You can see it removes all the content and adds. This is writing. So this will replace all the content and keeps the new content into it. That means it is replacing all the content and keeping the new content. That's what it is doing. So that is what write file method is. So the purpose of that write file method. That means this is going to add the new content into the file, whatever the content you defined. But we need to append the content into the file, not write all the new content into the file. That is very important. So what write file can do? Write file to replace the existing and add new content. New content. For this is the point. That's how we configure. That's how we configure. Let me keep this program. Okay. This is how we have to write the program. And suppose we have another option. So adding the content into file. Then usually we have to use append file. So append file. So to add content into file. So without replacing. So that is append file. So you have to just add a content here. So new content added, something new content added. And this, instead of write file, we have to use append file. So here we will compile that. So write successful. And in this document, so new content added. So it is adding some new content into that and it is configuring the new content. So generally, there are so many techniques. So the technique of reading the content, writing the content synchronously, asynchronously, and adding the content. So there are other methods like we can directly use a stream object, not file stream. By using a stream object also you can handle it. But better to use the file instead of using the stream object. So by using the file, so you can easily read and we can easily write the contents. This is how we have to manage the configurations. Right. Next, important. So generally in the Node.js, one more concept you need to understand, but that is required at very high level. That means for experienced people, that concept is required. That is how we configure for content for development servers, production servers, how we manage them. That I will show you once we start creating that server through a middleware, configuring the middleware and handling. So in Node.js, so don't get confused if anybody asked you like, do you know anything about console in Node.js? Means what is a console object in Node.js? So that is not a new concept. Already we have used this console log, console warn, console error in JavaScript. I told you that is the console object. People may ask you in different ways. They may ask you like how we log in console. So how Node.js log an object? Such questions are asked. Log means don't get confused. It is just console log. So by using the console log, you can manage the contents and you can handle the contents. Right? And another important is exception handling. So is same like I told you in JavaScript. Try, catch, throw, finally. Those statements are also used in the same way. In JavaScript already we learned. Try, catch, throw. I told you that exception handling, we don't need much here. But in later stage, in testing and all, we need to know and use them. So try method, catch method, throw method are the same, just like you have seen in your JavaScript. So this is all the basic thing you need to understand how to configure the server. How to configure the server, how to define the server, how we can handle the interactions with the files and all. But in real time, this server-side interactions are not enough because you have learned how to communicate with the database, get the data from the database and return the data. But actually this data need to be sent to the client from server. Accepting data from client, sending data from server to client, this all requires a very important content, requires a very important content. So that is actually, so for that you need a software called middleware. You need a software called middleware. We need a software called middleware. So server side, everything is working fine, but we need a middleware. The concept of middleware is in any network-based environment. In any network-based environment, middleware responsibility is to handle communication between computers in a network. So middleware responsibility is to handle communication between computers in a network. Actually, middleware is a software that provides set of services, so which are used for various things: operating system, data management, application, messaging, authentication, API management. All such things are managed by this middleware. So actually, at high level, what you should call the middleware as actually. So middleware is a software framework. Middleware is a software framework. So what is the purpose of this framework? It provides services and capabilities to applications that are running in a network, So actually it is used for, so it handles communication. Communication between computers in a network. Actually, middleware have the responsibilities like, so middleware has the responsibilities like, so the responsibilities like data communication and application services, like application services, so messaging. So, and messaging includes chat, email, all such facilities actually. Chat, email, all these things comes under that. And it includes options like authentication. That means security. It includes parsing, transporting the data. It includes cross origin resource sharing. What is CORS? I will tell you. And it includes cross-site request forgery. So cross-site request forgery. So these are all managed by middleware. And cross-site scripting attacks. All these are handled and managed by this middleware. Middleware have a lot of options. So middleware have a lot of things to handle. Actually, middleware is a software framework. In every server-side technology, so client-server communications, everything requires middleware. It's important. You need middleware. So actually, the middleware technologies are responsible for handling these operations, mostly communicating with the server. So managing the communication. So in simple terms, you don't need to worry much, just one word. You can simply say that it is responsible for handling communication. So between computers in a network. So it is responsible for transporting the data, parsing the data, converting the data. There are so many types of middlewares. So middlewares, so many types are there. That's the reason. So actually, middleware are classified into various types. Middleware is classified into various types. Actually, we have message oriented middleware. We have message oriented middleware. So we call MOM, message oriented middleware. We have RPCs, people call as RPCs, remote procedure call. So we have RPC, remote procedure call, that is calling the methods. So we have data or database, that is also middleware. It is used for typically communicating with the databases. We have API is also a middleware. That means application programming interface middleware. So APIs also comes under the category of middleware. We have object request broker. So we call that as ORB. These are very high level. So this much not required for your levels. This is mostly for more than 10-15 years experience software developers need to know all this. A fresher, this is too much. This is too heavy for them. You don't need to know all this. Actually, example is CORBA, Common Request Broken Architecture actually. And we have transactional transaction middleware. Now, recently we have this asynchronous data streaming middlewares. So many middlewares are there. We even have device middleware. That means they are used for handling mobile native. We have even portal middlewares. Portal. So portal middlewares. Portal middlewares are responsible for handling the hosting of services. So that means actually they are used for single screen, multiple screen applications. We even have robotics middleware. So many are there. So middleware is not just like what generally you know in general concepts. We have so many middlewares. Actually, the main intention of the middleware to handle communication. And for this, we need so many things. So many middleware softwares are there. Actually, one middleware software is middleware softwares. So many are there. Like we have IBM middleware softwares. So actually IBM have MQ, that is for messaging. So IBM have WebSphere. So IBM have IBM API Connect. So like you have like another one is Express. So we have even Cisco middlewares are there. Messaging middlewares, Cisco, IBM middlewares, Express middlewares. So many are there. So middleware is required in every technology. In every technology, we need these middlewares. The concept of middleware is to handle communication. And now the middleware that we are going to see is Express. That means by using Express middleware, we can handle communication between the client and server. So we are going to see how this Express.js is going to work. So Express.js, this is JavaScript based middleware. And by using this middleware, you can handle the communication. So, and establish the communication between the backend database with the server side. And we can define from the client side interactions, like get the data from the client and handle them. So actually, as I told you, these are all the middleware types classified into types. They are classified into groups also. We have application level middleware, router level middleware, error handling middlewares, built-in middlewares. So many are there. Now, we are going to see how to use this application level middleware. How do we configure the application level middleware and how to handle this application level middleware? So generally, so the middlewares are categorized into various types. And we need to configure the middleware for an application to handle the communication between the application and the database from the front end. For that, you need to install. So install Express is very simple. So in your project, if you want to use Express middleware. So npm install Express. Actually, one ability of Express is from the latest versions of Express. So from the latest version of Express, the advantage is several features are integrated. So you don't need to separately install separate features. Like earlier, suppose we need to translate data coming from another location, convert into JSON, we need a library called body parser. Suppose I want to translate the data, then we need these body parsers. Now Express itself have the body parser, it will manage. It can handle CORS. What is CORS? I will show you. That means now latest version of Express and the features support all these inbuilt. So that's the reason. So using this is enough. So you install Express, it is ready. You can start working with it. So that is simple. In our project backend, npm install Express. But this Express is a very big middleware. Lot of library need to be downloaded and installed for this. And once the Express middleware is installed, now we need to learn how to create communication here. That means how it creates a server, how it configures the server, and how it handles it. So that we need to understand. So that means how it is going to manage communication and handle the communication. So Express is successfully installed. Express gives lot of packages, you see. So 8 packages are added. So, and a lot of packages are defined for Express, which are used for handling various interactions. Now, first step, what you have to learn in Express is, here we have to learn how to create. So creating an API. How to create an API. So what is an API? What is the role of API? How to create an API that handles communication between the database and the application and sends to the client. Once we know what is API and how API is configured, now we can use this to consume the data and interact with the data from the client side. That we will see in our next session. Tomorrow we will see. Okay. Tomorrow we will see what is API, how the API is defined, and how do we work with the APIs. That's